Good afternoon, and welcome to all of our loyal listeners, and certainly a special welcome to any first-time listeners that are joining us today. This is the spring edition of the GovCon HR Roundup podcast. My name is Joe Young. I am the president of GovConPay. We are the only outsourced HR and payroll solutions provider focused exclusively on serving the government contracting marketplace. We are coming to you live here from the studios of BLC Digital Strategies, the media affiliate of Berenzweig Leonard LLP, and with the great support of our full team and especially our producer, Mr. Todd Castleberry. Before we get started, I always want to thank our sponsor, the folks from Berkshire Associates. Berkshire is an HR compliance expert with over 50 years of experience in providing compliance services and technology for organizations looking to build their ideal workforce through compliant, non-discrimination services, workforce analytics, and pay equity. So special welcome to any Berkshire clients who are joining us today. So after your sabbatical last month.
Oh, yeah.
It's great to get the band back together.
Yeah.
Don't believe any of the online rumors of an ugly breakup. Everything is all good here. So great to be back with the founding partners and employment law experts, Seth Berenzweig and Declan Leonard. If you guys want quick introductions of yourselves in the firm.
Hi, I'm Seth Berenzweig. I'm a managing partner of Berenzweig Leonard, and I help lead our corporate transactional and business litigation aspects of our business.
And I'm Declan Leonard. I am also managing partner here at Berenzweig Leonard, and I head up our firm's employment law section. It's great to be back here. I'm surprised we have Joe here today because, you know, it is golf season right now. And that guy, if you can't tell right now, but he's got his spikes on right now, and maybe even his clubs. I don't know.
Clicking through right in the car.
He doesn't waste any time. But anyways.
Schedule is clear after 3 o'clock today. Absolutely. Beautiful. It's great to have spring weather back here in the D.C. area. So as we get going today on today's topic, as always, for our listeners out there, if you have any questions for us, please don't hesitate to drop them in the chat. The team will send those to us. Today, our topic, we're going to discuss severance in the age of DOGE layoffs. So obviously, a very pertinent, hot topic in today's environment and uncertainty and the cuts that some of our clients and folks in the contracting space are seeing. But before we dive into that topic, guys, as always, we want to be topical, and there never seems to be a shortage of new topics, new releases, new executive orders from month to month as we get together. So why don't we jump in? You know, what are some of the hottest things that we're seeing that we want to maybe address before we get into our topic for the day?
Yeah, no. What are we, year 2 now of the Trump administration? Is that right? Sometimes it feels like that.
It does.
Anyways, so as Joe said, we want to kind of catch people up. Obviously in the first 60 days, I mean, we were devoting these roundup pretty exclusively to drinking from the fire hydrant, just trying to figure out what the latest things are. So things that are still hot right now, I mean, there was an executive order that was filed just yesterday that was issued by the Trump administration on an issue of disparate impact. And I think we're going to lead with that, Seth, because us in the employment law world, that's pretty seismic, actually.
Yeah, so there are two basic kinds of discrimination claims. The more commonly known one, and probably the more commonly asserted one, is the traditional disparate treatment claim, where it's just allegedly flat out intentional discrimination based upon a protected class. Disparate impact is a claim that asserts discriminatory treatment that, although not intentional, has a disparate impact upon a certain class. And that's something that is still a claim that's very much alive and well. It's established by a lot of different aspects, and we won't get too wrapped around the axle in terms of multiple regression analysis and all that, but it's safe to say that a statistical impact on a protected group is something that has been for a very long time a recognized claim. The president, with the stroke of a pen, has told his federal agencies, from our standpoint, disparate impact is no more.
Yeah, so like a great example, just a very simplistic example of the two. In practice, let's say you have a job posting and it says, no women need apply. You know what I mean? That's disparate treatment. That is singling out a protected class and saying, you're not going to work here. Disparate impact would be something more along the lines of, we're not mentioning women by name, but let's just say nobody under 6 feet tall need apply. Okay, that would have statistically, I mean, you would just look at statistics of height. It would have basically the practical effect of limiting the pool of women applicants for that particular job. That's disparate impact, and for decades now, the courts have recognized this and this as a viable avenue of proving discrimination. But as Seth mentioned with the stroke of a pen yesterday, President Trump said that the federal government should no longer recognize that as a viable theory of discrimination. And why that's important is because the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which falls under his executive branch, is the one that usually administers these things. And so they would no longer be able to look at one of those, the example I gave, they would have to just kick that right out. The courts still have their leeway in order to do so, but it's pretty important. Couple of other things. DEI continues to dominate, the minds of HR folks out there. You still have to continue to do these DEI audits. I bet you more and more, since we haven't been in here for about a month, more and more companies have had to do these certifications. I know some of my clients are getting these.
That they have no DEI components in any of their aspects, procedures, policies, handbooks.
Anything, exactly.
Yeah,
I mean, you're scrubbing stuff from, your social media, scrubbing stuff from your website, everything. And that's a False Claims Act certification and a condition to get paid. So it's pretty serious. The cuts are still coming. Agency cuts, we're seeing those. It's hard to keep track of half of them. I know State Department is very much on the chopping block under Rubio. And then let's talk about the FAR, because obviously with our government contracts clients and the folks that are listening here, that's a big one.
So the Trump administration has entered another executive order commanding that in 6 months, within that interim time period, there should be a review as to a comprehensive rewrite of the FAR. Now, that's obviously a big deal. And then the question becomes, okay, there are some aspects of the FAR that are embedded based upon footing with certain statutory requirements. So that may not go to the wayside, but a lot of the FAR is not. So the whole aspect of the provisions and the procurements and the methodologies, it's unclear to see how that's going to pan out. But this is something that's coming later this year, and definitely a big deal that we need to keep a close eye.
So I think they have 180 days to do this revamping.
I think the deadline, is right in October.
I don't even know if you can read the FAR in 180 days. I mean, I'm not about to try.
I started it about 3 years ago.
I think you should bring it to the beach this summer. It's good beach reading.
I was going to do that.
Two pages of sleep, your cure for insomnia every night. Just keep it next to the bed.
Exactly.
But GovCons are on their toes. They continue to be. I don't have to tell the folks that are listening here that's still very much a wild card in terms of things that are going on in this administration.
Yeah, and I think a lot, as you mentioned, the statutory. I think there's a lot of concern. I think a lot of in our middle market, our clients, a lot of the 8A type companies concerned about what the impact will be. So that will be very interesting how that.
Yeah, this year, I think it's safe to say that the 8A preferences and provisions are probably going to generally be intact. But we do have this change coming up in the FAR. We do have this encouraged change coming up in the procurement cycle. So it's unclear, and therefore the certainty is the uncertainty. I think companies just need to be thinking ahead and leaning ahead in terms of their business strategies.
So getting to our topic of the day, obviously a lot of our GovCons are facing the difficult prospects of layoffs based on pending government cuts. How should they view that severance as a part of that process? How should severance be looked at?
Yeah, I mean, so let's just take a step back. Severance agreements, separation agreements, they come in a little bit of shapes and sizes, but it's basically, an agreement, a legal contract where you agree as the employer when you have to do one of these layoffs, you're trying to sort of cushion the fall a little bit here, and you basically wrap it up in a contract. And so it's a way to do a layoff in a very controlled way. Now, it has financial implications, as we'll talk about, but it can also buy some goodwill in the process if a company's able to do it. And as we'll talk about, the terms are strictly negotiable most of the time, or frankly, the company can lay out those terms. So, even if you're offering 2 weeks of pay beyond what somebody, so we're talking about pay beyond their wages, beyond the pay that they're getting for services rendered. That's payroll. That's not what we're talking about here. That's your world.
Yeah, that's my world. But Seth, there's no legal requirement
No,
to enter into a severance agreement.
that's exactly right. The general rule is that severance agreements are not required. Now, the only exception to that would be the situation where the employment agreement that's in place might have certain exceptions. So if there are provisions in the employment agreement, or if there are other provisions that might give rise to a situation where someone is wearing two hats, where they're wearing an employee hat and then an equity hat, there may be some paperwork and unique plugins that have to come in from that perspective. However, generally in terms of whether companies have to enter into a severance agreement, they do not have to do so.
Yeah, and in some respects, their past conduct, kind of informs the process. I mean, if they've done it all along and then all of a sudden they stop, you're right, there's no contractual relationship.
Right.
You could argue maybe an implied in fact contract. I mean, I still think this is something largely voluntary in the hands of companies.
One other wrinkle that I'll add to it is that the history, Declan raises an interesting point about the aspect of history. Severance agreements sometimes raise interesting policy questions because in a severance agreement negotiation, I've seen situations where our client will come to us and say the employee has asked for an additional X weeks or an additional X months. And then the question becomes, if we do that, are we setting a new precedent? And if we do set that precedent and then the next person comes in and doesn't get similarly treated, is that somehow a discrimination claim? So I'm not trying to, get us lost in the weeds here, but if there are separation agreements that are coming about, you have to take a look at it in terms of the broader lens, just to make sure that you have a maintenance of consistency.
Yeah, I mean, you can bring potentially a discrimination claim.
Sure.
If you've got, a male getting 3 months and a female getting 2 months, I mean, that is different treatment. Now, now the company may be able to explain it. They may be able to say, well, the male employee's been there for X period of time,
Business
longer,
reasons,
and stuff like that. Sometimes what you can do is you can push out the date of separation also. So, for instance, in that particular case, if you did not want to create the optics of disparate treatment, not disparate impact, disparate treatment, what you could do is you could just push that male employee's separation date out a month, even though they're really not working. Technically, that's only 2 months severance, even though they're getting the benefit of 3. So there's ways around it. You got to be a little bit creative, but as Seth said, you got to do this with your eyes open and make sure you understand the optics.
Yeah.
And Declan, as you said, obviously most of the time this conversation revolves around compensation. Yeah. But obviously there's other aspects that we want to look at this. So what are some of the other things that an employee might be motivated to sign a severance agreement? Yeah,
so I mean a couple things. One, getting health care coverage paid for by the company. So we're talking about COBRA. COBRA is the federal law that kicks in, when you leave a company, and it's got some parameters. You can't be terminated for cause. It kicks in, I think it's 20 or more employees, but then states have their own little mini COBRA statutes. So health insurance, I mean, that could be very expensive, especially when you have companies that cover almost 100% of, health insurance. Payout of things like bonuses and vesting of synthetic equity. All of this is a creature of contract. So if it's all a negotiation. So let's just say somebody leaves, somebody's laid off in a month or two before a bonus is otherwise due to them. You can negotiate to get that bonus still paid, even though technically under the bonus plan you would not have qualified for it. So all of this is so I always tell clients, don't just look at the amount of the severance is usually in the first or second paragraph. Look at some of those other aspects and see if they can add up to what you're looking for. I mean, remember, you're leaving one company and you need to get another job. So making sure that company is going to not impede your ability to get another job. Most of the time, the best you're going to get is a neutral job, reference or something. Kind of the proverbial name, rank, and serial number as opposed to a real positive one, but you can always try. And I also see companies, maybe for higher level executives, doing outplacement training for that period of time. Yeah, and they pay for it. So, yep.
We actually do have a question that's come in from the audience related to that and to the COBRA.
Oh, it has COBRA.
Question is, can offering COBRA be contingent on accepting a severance agreement?
Yeah, no. So COBRA is a federal law. So COBRA kicks in, and it usually means that you can get 18 months. You're basically piggybacking on the company's insurance policy, and therefore you're getting better rates and better, it's kind of economies of scale.
For half the premium, right?
Well, no. So you've got to pay the full premium as the employee. You've got to pay whatever the company's deal is. You've got to pay that
During
for
that window
COBRA.
of time.
Yeah.
Right.
So to that question,
Access to the plans, yeah.
Yeah, so it's just access, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not, so whether or not somebody decides to sign a severance agreement, COBRA still, those notices still need to go out, and that's a whole separate headache if HR mucks that up.
Because then they don't have the opportunity to be able to maintain the policy through the contributions on the premium, and then the insurance can lapse.
That's exactly right.
Sure.
Yep.
So, Seth, obviously we're talking about some of the motivations for the employees for accepting an agreement. What are some of the other things maybe they can negotiate in? You said a lot of this stuff is negotiable. But from the employer side, in a time of uncertainty in
Sure.
cash flow, what's motivating the employers to be looking
Sure.
to extend cash
Yeah.
benefits and other benefits to their employees?
So the question from the company's side, well, what do we get out of it? Well, you get a couple of things out of it. First of all, you get releases. So to the extent that you have a traditional separation agreement, you'll get broad releases. The age of the person will have an effect on what they're waiving. So if somebody's over the age of 40 under the Older Workers Benefits Protection Act, there'll be some extra ribbons and bows in there. But the short answer is that the most important aspect are the releases. You also have other aspects that are traditionally embedded in there that the company gets a benefit out of, such as confidentiality and those kinds of controls that otherwise would not be imposed. Now, that needs to foot with what the contents already are in that person's employment agreement. Sometimes those employment agreements are already robust, and a lot of those things are in there. So the main function of that, what you'll get in that additional document, are the releases. But I have seen a number of times where a company doesn't really have an employment agreement. They really have, for lack of a better phrase, an offer letter.
Yeah.
And the offer letter is usually about a page and a third. And it usually says, hey, we're really happy to have you. You're starting off with this, and you're doing that, and you get this, and you get that, and there's your salary, and sign here, and welcome aboard. Okay, but that's not really locking anything in place. So what is being provided additionally with regard to releases and a separation agreement is going to ultimately also foot back to what, if anything, is in the original employment agreement. The less that's in the employment agreement, the more the company can benefit out of a release. Right?
That's right. And one thing to keep in mind, you raise a great point about, make sure when you're doing a separation or a severance agreement that you know what they have previously signed. Like if they've signed an employment agreement, or even what they call, a non-compete agreement, confidentiality. Right. Make sure that you don't extinguish that prior document. There's always going to be, people call it boilerplate, but it's actually very important stuff. It's usually on the last couple of paragraphs of an agreement, and it'll say, this constitutes, let's just say you have a separation agreement. This constitutes the entire understanding between the parties and supersedes anything prior.
Right.
Well, what you have just done, if you have that language in there, is you've just extinguished their non-compete, their confidentiality, things of that nature. So make sure you say that it also swoops in that document, and that document remains in full force and effect.
Maybe attach it.
Yeah. I've seen that too. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, the other aspect it's worth talking about is the layoffs that are going on right now are completely outside, most of the time, outside the control of companies. They're in reaction to what DOGE and what the Trump administration is doing. And that is no set course, in my opinion. Things are still in flux, in my opinion. And so the one reason why you may want to dip into the cash reserve, which I know is limited, and you got to be, you got to be guarded about that in these days, is you build up some goodwill. You help somebody have a soft landing and maybe, get back on their feet in a couple of months or something, because a lot of this stuff can be reversed. I mean, a lot of this stuff it may not be this year, it may not be next year, but these are your employees that may very well come back to you if this work comes back to you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's a
mean,
good point.
there have been situations where Musk and team have moved so quickly, and not a ton of examples, but several examples where people have to be brought back. Well, if you bring people back, it's because they're essential or close to it. And if they're essential and you've already wasted that relationship, then that's not going to help the organization.
Yeah, if it is seen as though the company is cutting the cord very quickly for its own financial and not really thinking about how this is going to impact the employee's family and stuff, I think employees will remember that and perhaps not be very receptive to those calls to come back.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
One other question, and we had another question just came in as well. We kind of touched on this, but I want to make sure if there's anything else we want to kind of add to this with regards to just offering severance agreements not to everybody and being selective in that. I mean, we talked a little bit about making sure it's not discriminatory. Is there any other thing we want to add to the selectiveness of severance agreements and that maybe slippery slope?
This does come into play, not in the context of these layoffs that are a little bit more group layoffs, but like, it's almost like the squeaky wheel gets the grease. The ones that you're most worried about in these terminations, those are the ones you look to do these because you do want to wrap them up in a bow. You don't want drama with them. I think while it is okay to have a little bit more of, a selective process in the past, I think when you're doing these layoffs, word's going to get around, and if there's a pattern to why or who you're giving these to, I think you're really exposing yourself legally.
And if you're going to do that for any business practicality, then you need to somehow make a contemporaneous business record of what the business reason is.
Definitely.
So we had a situation where someone was going to be departing, but they were a senior person. They had been there for a long period of time, and therefore, based upon their years of service, there was a business justification. If you can have a legitimate business justification, then that could be, something that you can pull out of your pocket later. Just make sure that you have it in a record, and then that would be something that you could get admitted later as a regular business record.
Yeah, so. and there is one motivation, beyond all of this, beyond the goodwill and everything, is sometimes you just want to tamp down the drama. You have a particularly volatile employee that you think might make hay with your prime contractor, the government client, because remember, they're most of the time on site. They know the government client and the people and their email addresses, and I'm saying this from experience. We deal with these sometimes, and sometimes you might want to get a separation agreement, a severance agreement, in order for them not to disparage the company. I've also recommended to clients that when you're going to pay severance, the longer you spread out those payments, the more, for lack of a better phrase, you have them on a bit of a leash. If you give them all lump sum payment, because it's your choice, if you want to give them lump sum versus continue paying them like regularly payroll, payroll schedule, you certainly can stop those payments if you get one hint that they have in essence breached the agreement. Because if they breach, you don't have to pay them.
Well, and some of the provisions in some of these agreements we've seen where employees have certain amount of days to actually review it or even have the ability to revoke their signature after they sign. Why would a company have some of those provisions in there?
It causes so much confusion. Our federal government, I'm sure they meant well when they did this, but it has to do with age discrimination. So age discrimination, a lot of people are surprised that as soon as you hit 40, you're in a protected class. It's like you're over the hill. They want you to have, I say that as way over that. But they want you, the thought behind it is they want you to have sufficient time to review it. And so what the law does, the Older Worker Benefit Protection Act, it's a federal law that says anytime you're asking an employee to waive or release age discrimination claims, which these are general releases that we're seeing, so of course it includes that, they get 21 days to review it. So that means when you send it over to them, it's not 21 days from the date of their termination or any of that. It's 21 days from the date you email or hand it to that person or whatever. And so they get those 21 days to review it, and then once they sign it, they get 7 days to revoke it. I've been doing this 30 years now. I've never seen a revocation after somebody has signed it. don't know if you have. I don't know if any
No.
of the folks in the firm have.
No.
But I've never seen that happen where they sign it.
The
and
front
then,
end's 100 times more volatile than the back end.
I agree. Once
Yeah.
they sign it, they're pretty resigned. But what it does do is it creates a lot of like, I would maybe I'm overstating it when I say confusion, but like then you have to account for all of this. You can't pay somebody. Some people want to get paid right when they sign. Well, no, you got to wait until 8 days because those 7 days have to go by. So it's a little cumbersome, but it is a factor in these agreements, and that's why you see them in there. Normally, for single layoffs, 21 days, 7 days to revoke.
It's like the severance lemon law, like with a car you get to bring back.
Yeah.
7 days.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Buyer's remorse.
All right,
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah,
no,
yeah.
as I slept on this. And a follow-up question, does that review timeline reset if an employee makes any changes to the agreement?
Well, I think that there can be a difference in the timeline depending upon the circumstances. If you have an individual layoff for someone over the age of 40, then the 21 and 7 days applies. For mass or group layoffs, I believe it's 45 days and 7.
Yeah.
It's the two main features that make it a different situation for a release agreement in group layoffs is that the time to review is longer, and the attachments to the agreement are a little bit more extensive because you get a chart showing the ages of the people who are affected by that. The other thing that I'll briefly note, because I know that we're running out of time, I think how you capture and describe the developments of what's happening is also important. I've seen a situation where only 1 or 2 people are let go, but then the company is referring to it as a reorganization. If it's not really a reorganization, don't use that word. Be careful with the words you use because words get loaded. And if you say this is a reorg and we had to let her go, her lawyer will come back and say, well, it was a reorg and she was the only person who was reorged. So not only do you have to look at it in terms of these little procedural elements, but sometimes substance matters.
Well, not to mention the people that are left behind are hearing, because word travels quick. We know how that works, you know. And people are hearing that there was a reorg. If there's a reorg, I'm looking over my shoulder too. So
Right.
that's definitely one.
Yeah.
You mentioned the concept of the timeline resetting, and this is an issue that sometimes happens with HR folks when they're working with severance agreements. So I said the 21 days starts when you hand them the agreement. If there is a negotiation and there are material changes to it, the law says that the 21 days is restarted. You can just imagine how this just takes forever and ever. So you can actually put a contract in there that says any material changes in the severance agreement will not restart the 21-day clock. And by the way, this is not really something you're trying to do adverse to an employee, because an employee doesn't get paid until
They don't want it to
sign.
reset too, and then have the 7-day waiting period again too. Yeah.
They start to miss like payroll periods, and
Yeah.
you know, a lot of people live cash to cash. I mean, payroll to payroll. So definitely.
All right, so wrapping up maybe in our time here, Declan, what are, for people that are going through this severance process, in addition to some of the topics, what are some of the other things that should just be a part of that process that they should be considering?
And most of this is based on war stories. Return of property, and most of that time it's going to be the laptop, whether it's your laptop, the prime's laptop, or the government client's laptop. I can't tell you how many times we've had to intercede on behalf of our government contractors to get that laptop back. I usually make the payment of severance contingent upon already receiving that laptop back. Unemployment becomes a question in these agreements because sometimes they'll characterize this as a resignation just to kind of soften the blow for, maybe help them in their next thing to show that they weren't laid off. I usually have a phrase in there that says the company will not contest eligibility for unemployment. Give them a chance to, in addition to get severance, they won't get unemployment until the severance is over with, so they can't double dip. So that's another issue. And remember, your final paycheck, and if you owe them accrued but unused paid time off payouts, those have to be paid regardless of whether or not somebody signs a severance agreement. And know your state laws on those, because for instance, DC says you've got to give them their final paycheck within 24 hours. California says you've got to hand it to them in the meeting that you're terminating.
As a payroll company, we know that.
Yeah.
We do know that,
and
because
it
we hear that
trips
all
up
the time.
companies all the time. Yeah. Taxation, it's mostly going to be treated as wages, even though it's not for services rendered, it's most of the time going to be treated just as similar as wages.
And I'll throw in one tiny little final note. For people who are off-site, and you're separating people and they're off-site with their laptop, give them a FedEx or UPS box with a return label. Just make sure that you separate out a contention of a lack of clarity in terms of how it gets returned. Yeah. You give them the box, you have the tracking number, you make sure that you do that, because that computer has sensitive confidential information, as well as things that may also belong to the agency. So controlling that laptop. We've seen a lot of laptop stories, right?
Oh my God! I had one where the employee wrote back and said, "Show me in the employee handbook where it says I have to return my laptop." And I was just like, I mean, there's a lot of things that are not in that handbook that are kind of common sense. Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's theft.
They're too busy deleting their browsing history.
There is the crime thing.
Yeah. All right, well, guys. As always a pleasure. I think great, timely content again for our viewers here. So thank you to everyone for making time in your day to join us again. Hope this was helpful. Hope some key takeaways. If you're going through some of these challenging times, definitely hope this was beneficial to you and your team. On behalf of Seth, Declan, our team behind the scenes, thank you again. We look forward to seeing you next month. We will be on the fourth Thursday again next month on May 22nd. We have not come up with a topic yet. So what we're going to throw out to our viewers today, if anybody out there is like, I really wish they would talk about X, put that in the chat. Feel free to email any of us directly. If there's certain topics out there you see people are looking for some support in or would like us to address, we would love to accommodate if we can. So look forward to some feedback from the group, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Take care.